So when we started here at the office, we started off just trying around with a little bit of lateral line and um, just a collection bucket at the bottom. If you noticed on the drive up the hill, you might have seen a little T-post with a 5-gallon bucket lid. That's our first attempt at using maple lines, and I'm really glad that we did it that way. Um, because I think sometimes you can dive into something before you're ready, and playing around with it a little bit was handy to us. So, um, what I'm going to talk about is a very simple thing. If you went up north to Vermont's Proctor Maple Research Center, which I think maybe some of you have done that, um, you'll get a lot more. I feel like a high school science teacher, and if you went up there, you'd be talking to a NASA rocket scientist. So don't expect that what I tell you is going to be the final word on it. I'm just going to tell you what we did and how it worked for us. And I make no claim that this is the only way to run lines or that it's even the best way, but it is a way that has worked for us. So we've been doing it. We're going into our 6th year here at the office of doing this. I'm going to try to blow through the show kind of quick, and then assuming everybody has your blood's already thickened up enough to go outside, we'll run out there and have a look-see, and you can ask any questions you want. Um, After you've done it the way Jeremy does it for a couple of years, it's inevitable that you're going to want to scale up. You're at least going to think about it. And in our case, I did the same thing he did. I had an outside grill, and I had one of those disposable aluminum foil trays is what I cooked my first syrup on. And the first time I cooked it, I waited and waited and waited and waited, and finally it started to thicken up. I went inside for just a second, and so help me, it was just a second. Came back out, and it was marshmallowed. Part of it was candied, and the rest of it was blackened like a roasted marshmallow. So that kind of started the course of there has to be a better way to do this. And so that led to the maple lines. If you just want enough to do it for your family and friends, what Jeremy shared is what you're going to want to do. But if you're starting to think about having 100 taps or so, maybe a little more than that, then you're going to start thinking about maple lines. And I'm assuming most of you are from this immediate area and that your maple trees are on steep hillsides. Is that the case for everybody here? Even us mountaineers, I know we've got one leg that's naturally longer than the other. We're adapted to walking on the hillsides, but it gets old after a while. And so the lines kind of take care of that problem because you can direct all of the sap down to a place that's easy to collect it. And instead of going around from tree to tree and taking a pail off the tree, you're getting to go to one place. Hopefully you've designed it so that it's a place that you can get a pickup truck to, gather all that stuff up, and either haul it to where you're going to be cooking it down, or if you've got a really, really good scenario, your maple lines are going to run right into your sugar house. And that's not what we have at the moment, but that is what we're working towards. So if you come back in the next year or two, you're going to find that our sugar house is going to be out there where the maple lines are. So we learned really quickly that 5 taps is the maximum you can have on a lateral line. How many of you have used line? Just a handful. What happens when you try to put more than 5 taps on a lateral? Does it work? Have you noticed during the heavy flows that it backs up in the line or that it gets airlocked? Okay. Right, that's what Wes was saying before this workshop. We just use a simple, we don't have the wet dry, it's just one line, but we noticed that we were getting airlocked and we weren't getting the flow that we had been getting, which you can't always blame it on that. Sometimes it can be that your first year of tapping a tree is going to be a really, really good flow. And after that, you might notice that it varies some. But a virgin tree is going to flow the best, usually. So we started down here on the road as you came up. There's just a handful of trees. We came up on the property and we discovered that we had a really thick grove of sugar maples and red maples that were kind of in a mix. And it was in a place that was really inaccessible, and we had no choice but to consider a maple line system. And so I guess the first thing that we did was we went around with a GPS unit. And we actually, and I know this sounds high tech, but so help me, it's not that big a deal. If you've ever used a GPS to plot where your deer stand is in the woods, or anything, that's all this is. But we would go from tree to tree and we would mark where all those trees were. And when we got back to the office, we plotted it on a map. And the reason that benefited us is it let us see where all the trees were and how they were clustered and how would be the most efficient way of running that maple line down and intercepting all those trees. It can be tricky when you're in the woods trying to figure out, if there's maple trees everywhere, how do you run that line to make sure that you're minimizing your expense? This is a government operation, and contrary to myth, we're not flush with cash. We were trying to do it on a shoestring budget, and so we needed to do it cheaply, and this was the way that we did it. So this is a 10-year investment, is usually about what they will tell you that lines will last. And so you want to make sure that you do it right. You don't want to have to go back in and redo things. So that's how the mapping helped us. But after saying all that, I will tell you that we have upgraded every single year since we installed it. The first time we did it, we ran the main line. And if you're not familiar with the terminology, this is what we're calling main line. This is 3/4 inch main line. It comes in different colors. So if you're in a place that you might have a little bit of worry about vandalism, maybe Bubba likes to shoot at things, and he thinks that your pretty blue line makes a convenient target, or maybe you've got just a place that you think people might be prone to mess with it. You can get that in different colors. I know they've got a brown and a green that kind of camouflage it a little bit in the woods, and so you might want to give that a little thought. But anyway, so we'll get into some of the rest of the tool stuff in just a minute. Did that go off? You can still hear me? All right, it's sounding funny to me. So after we first did this, we had sags. We didn't know that you had to use those ratchet straps or the ratchets, turnbuckles, to tighten the line up. So it kind of looked like a snake going through the woods. We fixed that problem. Then we had our drop lines and our tap lines. When we first did this is your lateral line. These are your taps or your spiles. These are your T's, and this will tie in to the lateral that's going on down to your main. Okay? Kind of looks like a stethoscope, is how I picture it. I'm going to contradict Jeremy just a little bit and say that when you talk to 5 people, you'll get 6 opinions. Y'all found that to be the case? Beekeepers are like that, and so are maple producers. A lot of the sources that I've looked at have recommended no more than 2 taps per tree, no matter what the diameter size is. And it makes it easy for us because it standardizes our maple line. We can pre-make a bunch of these doubles. You can sit in a warm place on a cold day and just go ahead and assemble a bunch of these. And then when you go outside, you're not freezing your keister trying to install these. And since only a handful of you have done maple line before, When it's about 20 degrees outside, how easy is it to work that line? The tool seems like it wants to jam up, and the tubing isn't very flexible. You have to fight to get the tabs to go in it. So it's better to do this somewhere warm. I'd also recommend doing this in October and November, getting your system in. Not trying to do it during maple season. Every year we've done it has been during maple season, which is just goofy, but that's what we've done. So a lot of times you'll see that you miss trees. We've done that every year. We've missed trees and we've added them, and so you're going to want to constantly upgrade. This isn't maple country. How many of you are from locally? Let's say within 100 miles of here. Okay. So mostly it's our vendors that are the experts that are far away, right? All right. He's smiling like maybe not. This isn't maple country, so it can be tricky to find somebody else that knows what they're doing to advise you. And when we first did this, I had a buddy that was from Maine. I met him on a Farm Bureau trip. And we sat down in Iowa at a table together, and I asked him what he did, and so we kind of struck up a conversation. And when we started thinking about maple stuff here locally, I remembered what his operations name was, and I tracked him down through Facebook. And so we became really, really good friends then because we had something in common. And I would call him up and say, Ben, how do I do this? And he would talk me through that. And so it's really handy if you've got somebody that can kind of come out and work with you. I think if you're from one of the three counties, Phil and Jeremy both know enough that they can come out and kind of make an introductory opinion or advice on how to do it. And we reserve the right to modify our answer later. But anyway, I was able to find somebody that had more experience than me. Sometimes it can be your vendor. When I first started, I was working, and this is not, I'm not pushing anybody. I'm just telling you who I worked with first. First folks that we dealt with vendor-wise was CDL, and CDL's up in Vermont. And one thing that they did for us was we told them how many taps that we had, and based on the number of trees and 2 taps per tree, they were able to pretty accurately tell us how much tubing and everything we would need. So that was pretty handy. And to be honest with you, they nailed it. I mean, I don't think it was off by very much at all. So they can help you as far as how much you're going to need. But maybe some neighboring producers, extension publications, which if you got your grab bag, inside that grab bag is all of Kentucky's maple publications. Another thing that is a really good source, though I have had a few people roll their eyes when I've mentioned it because, again, this is somebody's opinion. But the North American Maple Syrup Producer's Manual, that is a really, really good resource to me. And I've referred to it over and over again. It's some of it's simple, some of it gets a little complicated, and but it's good to have. This is like fishing. Any of y'all fish? You know how when you go to the store, there's always a lure that's better than the lure you've got, and it will always catch more fish than you've been catching. There's always a better way to do things, and so as far as tools for working line, I'll start with what I would consider to be the best. I'll let Michael's going to be the Vanna White of this. You're going to need to do the arm gesture. So this is kind of a multifunction tubing tool. There's several different styles of it. If you get one of the catalogs, you're going to see that there's umpteen different ones. And for what it is, it will come off to you as outrageously expensive. You can look at that and you can say, I could weld one of those real easy, and maybe you can. But those tools are about $114, $115, somewhere thereabouts a piece. But what they allow you to do is to clamp onto that lateral and with the vice grips, and there's a tubing cutter on there, and then you can force the taps and the tees and things into the lateral line. And we've got one of those that works really well. We've got another one that busts your knuckles. The one that's going through is a knuckle buster. But we usually fight over who gets this one. And I usually win, right, Michael? We've also got a stripper. And the purpose of the stripper is, if you don't know, they do not recommend, if you're using plastic spiles, that you reuse those spiles year in and year out. They're good for 1 year. If you've got the metal ones, then yes, you can put those in hot water, boil them, and reuse them. But for these, and we use the kind that have the little check valve in them, if you know what I mean, it's got a little black BB in it, and that prevents, when it freezes back at night, it prevents the sap from backflowing into the tap hole. And the reason that matters is bacteria, the tree reacts to the bacteria in that tap. And if it back siphons when it freezes at night, it will cause that hole to seal back up faster. And that means that you're going to lose production. And I've seen numbers on this, and I don't remember exactly, but I want to throw a number out and say that it's somewhere in the 15 to 20% range is what they said that the ones with the check valves, whoever's got that little tap going around, that using something that will prevent the back siphoning will improve your production by that much. So we can send that down the line too. Okay. So that's also the purpose for why you don't blow in the hole. I don't remember. Did you cover that? All right. So you don't blow in the hole, but you use the stripper tool to cut the old tap off the lateral line. And it lets you, basically over time, what you're going to be doing is just cutting this piece off, and it'll allow you to take tees loose or anything. Otherwise, you're doing it with a pocket knife, and we've had a few mishaps with pocket knives in the woods. That's not a good place to, yeah. Michael got bloodied last year. Did you have to go to the hospital over that? Is that where you met your girlfriend?
No, not that trip.
On another trip, he met the girl he's dating. So maybe you want to do that. I don't know. If any of you have ever worked construction before, we call this a pigtail. But when you run the wire for your main line, you have to attach the tubing to the wire with these wire ties. And you have to use the pigtail to twist it on, okay? And that's what that handy little tool does. So you'll want one of those. We use the pliers on those saddles. For those wire ties, to tie I'll get into this in just a second. Yeah, just like concrete. When you're doing the metal for concrete, we call these saddles. I think that's what they're called in the book. But basically, that's how your lateral connects to your main line. And there is a tool, of course, to drill in to that main line first. You clamp down with that and spin the drill around. It'll make a little hole. You want it to be smooth so that it gets a good seat. There's different styles of these saddles. We like the one that's got the gasket in it. I know some of them have a gasket that's got like a little clamp that goes in place. This one, it's got teeth. I guess you can hear that. I believe that may be a certain vendor's style. This is a CDL saddle, but Pass that down. If you go to Leader or any of the catalogs, they're going to have different styles of taps. They're going to have different styles of saddles, and it's really just your own personal preference. A level can come in handy so that you make sure that you're actually going downhill. I think it needs to be 5% is what they've told us. Wire cutters for your wire that's going to hold your main line. Turnbuckle handle. This is basically for your wire that's suspending your tubing, and then the handle to ratchet it and tighten it up. That's going to stretch over time. If you hung this during warm weather and then it turns off cold, things constrict when they get cold, and so it'll tighten up when it's cold, and it'll kind of slump when it gets warm. You'll want to go through occasionally over the course of the season and just make sure you give it a turn or two and make sure everything's still taut. So you'll want that. You need a rubber hammer, which we don't have in here, but that's for driving your taps into the tree. And Jeremy mentioned the tap-tap-tunk when it changes. Hello, Billy. When it changes sound, that's when you know it's in far enough. What can happen if you overdrive that, it splits the bark, and then the sap doesn't go into the tap. It runs down the tree, and you don't want that, obviously. So that's why that matters. We usually keep a couple of drills, and we have a couple of battery packs so that we don't have to stop because the drill has died. And when we first started doing this, you don't know how to do things. We had electric tape on the bit so that we knew when to stop. But after you drill about 4 or 5 holes, that electric tape keeps getting shoved up further and further. So our buddy in Maine said, why don't you just shove some of your lateral on there? That's what we do. And so we shoved our lateral onto the bit, and that's our depth gauge. When that hits the tree, you stop. If you go too deep, there can be problems, and if you don't go deep enough, there can be problems. So there is a range that will work. So when we got our order, it came in one huge shipment, and we felt a little bit like the dog that caught the car. We didn't know what are we supposed to do. And it involved going to a lot of books and catalogs and internet sites and everything else, trying to figure out how you're supposed to do this. But we eventually figured out that it would be best if we just went to the highest tree on each of our lines, tried to find a good, healthy tree that could be our anchor tree, and you start with your wire, and you use just high-tensile wire. There are these things. Did you bring those torpedoes? Where's he at? No. There are these things that are like, they're wire splicers. No. It looks like a little torpedo, but have y'all ever worked with electric fence before? You know how they've got these little things that will join wire together to splice it in? Yeah, it grips it. And I think they're outrageous expensive in my opinion. But anyway, so we just wrapped it around the tree and through the turnbuckle. The wire, we ran it through some lateral first so that it wouldn't cut into the tree. You don't want that wire to girdle that tree. And so we tightened that up, and afterwards we ran our main line. And the first year we did this, we just dead-ended it. We just had it suspended. Yeah, there's the wire splicers. We got lucky this time. Tractor Supply had a clearance sale, and we got those for $2. And I'm pretty sure we paid $18 or more for like a 6-pack of those last time we got them. But anyway, we just had the tubing suspended from the wire the first time, and it started to snake and it would sag. And so we found out that you have to come in with these things, and I'm not being politically incorrect. To me, it's like a Chinese finger trap or handcuffs. But basically, it grabs hold of that main line. If you push on it, you can slide it on there, and then it grabs hold of it. You run a separate turnbuckle to tension this up. So you're tensioning your wire and your tubing separately from each other. And what do we get for these? They weren't cheap either, were they? For 9 of them? Yeah, so that's not really cheap either. But it's stainless steel, and you're going to have it for a while, right? So if y'all want to see that, I'll pass it around too.
What do you call that, Chad?
It's called something fingers, tubing fingers, or... All right, there you go. Strain relief? All right. So, it is important that that top tree be healthy, and we ran the wire. We've covered all of that. On your, Susan, on your wire ties, make sure that you do that about every 12 to 18 inches, and that's going to keep there from being a little sag in the tubing as it's hanging on the wire. We had a guy that came down from Ohio State the first time we had a maple class, and I don't remember, was he a Graham? Gary Graham. And of all he said, this is what I remembered, of course. And so he said, just remember STD when you're running maple lines, and it's not what you're thinking. He said it's straight, tight, and downhill. You can zigzag the main line a little bit, but the purpose is you don't want it doing this. You don't want it to snake up and down, because every time it goes down, that's a little place that sap's going to gather, and it's going to ferment and turn sour and rancid, and it's going to corrupt. And it'll also be a place where algae grows in your lines, and it's kind of a sanitation issue. So make sure that you keep it tight, and that means you'll have to go back and readjust. We just went through and we've been working on our lines, and trees had fallen. We've been doing some stuff that Billy's going to be talking about a little later, timber stand improvement. We've been improving our sugar bush by doing hack and spray on some of the non-maple trees. We've had a lot of poplars in the middle of our sugar bush, and I'm not trying to steal your talk, but I'll just say that you're trying to get the canopies big and full on those trees. And so as we've killed those trees out, girdled them, those branches start dropping, and they'll fall on your lines, and then you have to go in and fix the sags. They will stretch your wire out. And if your wire breaks, which ours did, then you need those wire splicers to repair the damage. And you're going to want to check this on a regular basis. We found out that we had a saddle that we hadn't tied lateral into, and we ran our vacuum all last year with an open hole on our main line. So guess what the vacuum did? 0. We were sucking air the whole time, and that's not what we wanted. We've learned a lot by mistakes. You guys learn by mistakes? We learned that it is best to use J's. We thought when we first started that it didn't really matter, that you could just tie this thing to a tree. They were just trying to sell you something, right? And so we thought we could just plug those things into the tree and just have that tension going out and down to the main line. And the problem with it is, as that gets warm, it does this. It doesn't work. If you, Michael, I'm not seeing one of those J's up there, but there's a little black piece that you end up, when you first run this thing, you hook a little J in and run that lateral down to your main, and it keeps it tensioned then. You run this down to that line. Yeah, just pass that around to them. So we figured that one out eventually. So we were ready to connect to the trees, and we assembled all of our drop lines and our tap lines, And the tank was the last thing that we had, and our local Farm Bureau actually helped us out, and they gave us some money for the tanks. And we got a really big 550-gallon tank, and then we got one of those little small 60-gallon tanks. And the rule of thumb was that you should have the tank capacity for 1 gallon per tap during peak flow. Have you all ever had have you ever had that much flow? A gallon per tap, all in one day? All right, we've not had it happen yet. Oh, really? Well, I've not had that problem yet, but what we've been doing, because that big 550-gallon tank has been so hard to clean, and it's not really mobile, it's not near where we have water to clean it, we just put the little 60-gallon tank on a trailer, and we run it out there, and it's all on one thing, the vacuum pump and the tank. We run it out there. When it gets full, we shut the main line off, and it's filling up, but we run out here, and we've got a vacuum pump that we pump it up and into another tank, and then we go back. So there's a company called that makes a vacuum pump that's called Sapsucker, and I think this is probably your entry-level vacuum pump. And it's usually good for, I think, 500 to 1,000 taps, but that's what we're using. And after you put a vacuum in, you definitely need to go check for leaks. And if we'd done that and done a good job at it, we would have found that we had a saddle that wasn't plugged in. But obviously we did not. There's a little bit of discussion about the wet-dry system. And what I've been talking about is just a very simple main line with laterals. If you get up in different terrain, or if you go to I guess a more in-depth technical system. Michael's running and getting everything. He's awesome. Anyway, there's different ways of doing the main line, and there's some folks here that can probably tell you all about it. The folks from Savage can tell you about their system. We're maxed out at around 500 taps. That's about all the trees that we have. We've got other trees that are small, but they're not online yet. They're less than 8-inch diameter. So we're using those as our replacement trees. We're leaving those in the woods, obviously, but we're not tapping them. If you all are interested, we'll run out there and I'll show you what we've got. So just bundle up and we'll meet out front here. And so we've got just on this hillside and around to the top of this little ridge that comes off, we've got about 500, probably 550 taps because we keep adding to it. They're all congregated over here in this little cove anyway. So, any questions about it?
How much problems do you have with deer and squirrels?
We've not had any problems with squirrels yet. We have had deer chew through it. We've had coyotes chew through it. We've had woodpeckers that have come up and pecked around the tap hole where the tap was going into the tree. We like I said, we've had mostly trees falling on the line has been the biggest issue. But other than that, not like you'd think.